Welcome back for episode 10 of 28 Days of Color, presented by S.T.E.A.M Engine Academy. Today's topic, color in Georgia. We'll talk about legalized segregation in the South and then speak with a Georgian, Vivia Rowe, about her experiences in the South.
In the wake of the post-Civil War era, many African American people were given their freedoms under the Civil Rights Act of 1875. Yes, so after the Civil War, blacks were actually given the rights and their civil rights and liberties as freed men in the 1800s. Unfortunately, this time period would not last long, following several high-profile cases of racial injustice, including the U.S. versus Ryan, U.S. versus Singleton, Robertson and Wife versus Charleston Railroad Company. The United States Supreme Court decided that the 1875 Civil Rights Act was unconstitutional. What this meant is that many black people who fought for their rights during the Reconstruction era and during the pre-slavery era lost these rights in several different types of ways. One such case became the reason why separate but equal changed the law of the land of the United States. In 1896, a man named Omar Plessy was sitting in a whites-only section of a streetcar, and when he was told to move to the blacks-only section, he refused. Now, in refusing to move to the black-only section, he sued the railroad company, and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, after declaring that the civil rights law of 1875 was unconstitutional, decreed that separate but equal facilities can exist so long as these facilities are adequate for both races. Essentially, whites were given their own section and blacks were given their own section, but so long as these places were equal or given the same services, then there's no senses of racism there. Now, this could be anything far from the truth, but because several states started to pass what we call Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow was the name of a song by a man by the name of Thomas Rice, and he would have these shows called minstrel shows, these dance shows and dance troupes, where they would oftentimes plays that played on the stereotypes and prejudices of black people. So, for example, when we see the Mammy, or we see the Aunt Jemima, or we see a lot of stereotypical images of black people during the early periods, things such as blackface were popularized during these shows. And in a lot of these shows, they played on the stereotypes to an extreme way to where whites actually believed this. For example, this is what in an era when the watermelon became popularized, because these shows would have blackface of characters who would dance, and they would do these types of troupes of exaggerations of black people. What happened over the years is that the name Jim Crow started to evolve, and it started to grow into something where it eventually became laws that were meant to reinforce segregation amongst black people and white people. So, for example, when we in some states there were segregated schools, and in some states there was segregated there were segregated water fountains, and even in some cases interracial marriage was seen as illegal, and people who cohabited in the same races would be fined or go to jail. Now, Jim Crow was also reinforced by the Ku Klux Klan. So even when blacks wanted to do things such as voting, or when they were in certain areas, they were designated white-only areas, they would have the Ku Klux Klan racist groups, supremacist groups, who would reinforce Jim Crow laws so that black people who lost their right to vote, or voting restrictions, or who had voting restrictions on them, were reinforced by these groups who would do things such as lynchings, and they would do things such as cross burnings and attacking people's houses. And in Georgia, many of these cases, and a lot of places, were very much strong, because this is where we have the founding of the Ku Klux Klan and its headquarters in Stone Mountain, Georgia. Many of the white-owned establishments refused to serve blacks, or even if they did serve blacks, at segregated sections. So what that meant is that some hotels would refuse to serve black people, or some restaurants would refuse to serve black people, while others would have sections for black people. And now all of this would change in the 1960s with the civil rights movement. And just so we have a better understanding of how things happened, Jim Crow was first a minstrel show that happened in the 1800s that made fun of and characterized black people, and from these laws became the evolution of Jim Crow. With Jim Crow came the restrictions of black people's freedoms and movements. Much of these freedoms we had already fought for and already had from the Civil Rights Law of 1875, which was repealed by the Supreme Court. So we once had these freedoms, we once had the ability to serve in Congress and to vote and to go to any hotel that we choose to go to, but it was taken from us. And it wasn't until over 100 years later, during the civil rights movement of the 1960s, that we would see ourselves getting some semblance of our freedoms again.
Welcome back to 28 Days of Color, presented by S.T.E.A.M Engine Academy. Today's episode, Color in Georgia. And we're here with Vivia Rowe, a Georgia resident right now, to tell us her experience. Hi, Vivia. How are you?
Hey, Lauren. Glad to be here.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. So my first question to you is, what brought you to Georgia, and how long have you been in Georgia?
So I've been here since October 2005. What brought me to Georgia? At the time, my best friend was living here, so that was a big draw. But really, Atlanta's so progressive, full of progressive Black people. Mm-hmm. Plenty of job opportunities, great cost of living, slower Southern lifestyle. Still on the East Coast, close to some beaches, mild weather. What's not to love? I love Atlanta. There's Atlanta and there's Georgia. I love Atlanta.
Right. So what is the difference between Georgia and Atlanta?
Well, Georgia is diverse. It's happening. There's full of culture, music, food, things to do. And then Georgia's a little bit slower and traditionally Southern. Well put. Mm-hmm. And out there's been as much going on there as here in California. But tell me in particular, the whole excitement around Stacey Abrams and this 2020 election. Well, Stacey Abrams, and I'm going to do my best to do her justice because I admire her so much. But I'm not a Stacey Abrams expert, but I'll tell you what I see. Stacey Abrams ran against Brian Kemp for governor of Georgia in 2018. There was some definite discrepancies with the votes, and the votes counted. He ended up winning, but what she did was she mobilized on the ground, created an organization called Fair Fight, I do believe, Fair Fight, and her efforts turned Georgia blue. So with this last election, with Biden against Trump, Biden was victorious. And now we have two Democratic senators in place. That's Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock.
Wow, that's crazy progress and good for her. Now, with still being in Georgia, now we're in 2021, and we still kind of have some leftover issues from 2020 and moving into the new year, a lot going on politically. So now that you're looking at 2021, what are you going to be asking the new administration to kind of improve on? What are things you're concerned about that need to be addressed?
Well, we have leftover issues from the founding of this nation and before that. So let me just go ahead and say that real quick. And a lot of that needs to be addressed. Not a lot of that, all of that needs to be addressed. What am I looking forward to with this administration? Progress, real change. I don't want just some piecemeal things. It's great to see Harriet Tubman on a $20 bill. It's great seeing those Confederate statues being torn down that should have never been put up in the first place. But let's see some real policy change on the ground so that I don't have to worry about my husband and my kids leaving the house.
Right. And, I have a 12-year-old son too, and I have that same concern even when they're out with me with a mask on. You can't see that childish face and those chubby cheeks behind the mask. So I understand and I share your concern. And that kind of carries into my next question. What has been the challenge as a parent and a Black woman trying to raise your family in such social unrest?
My challenges are no different from my mother and her mother and her mother and her mother before that. Challenge with raising children who are politically and socially aware, who are realistic about what's going on around them, who are aware of their individual boundaries that are set for them but not by them, that some of their peers don't have to adhere to. I'm gonna let you read between the lines on that. And it's hard to toe that line between being age appropriate and real with your kids, because you don't want to freak them out. You don't want to rob them of their innocence and their childhood, but you need them to be self-aware and aware of what's going on around them. And teaching them to do their best to avoid any kind of interaction with the police or just any other unsavory characters.
And where you are, do you feel your community, that neighborhood that you're in, is safe enough for them to say, walk down the street to go visit a friend?
Anytime they want to go visit a friend, my husband and I are more comfortable driving them.
Okay.
Now, we live in a lovely area, in a nice little subdivision. I feel partially comfortable with them walking the dog. I feel more comfortable driving them where they need to go. You look out the window and the lawns are manicured and everything is neat and tidy, but I'm not foolish enough to get comfortable with a false sense of security.
Right. I understand. And, even with some of the negative things that are going on, we still see some of those silver linings. What has been a positive difference that you've seen? Has there been anything that made you kind of feel like, okay, we're moving in the right direction?
Again, Georgia's blue. The United States has the first Black woman, Indian American, in office as vice president. I mean, you can't help but get excited about that. And, I'm excited personally because I do share some similarities with the woman. She's from the Bay Area. She's Black, and she's a member of my same sorority. Excited about that. But, there's a positive, but I'm gonna need to see some more stuff. I hate to stay on the critical side, but I'm also real.
What is something you'd like to see addressed immediately, if you can?
How much time do you have?
Right. Is there any one thing that you can point out in the forefront of your mind?
Well, so we're in the middle of a pandemic. I would like to see some relief get out to my brothers and sisters of all hues, not just brown folks. There's people out there suffering. I'm particularly concerned about children who are already living in insecure households, who maybe don't have stable home life. I'm concerned about what they're facing, whether they're economically disadvantaged or not. I know that for some children, school was their only safe place, their happy place, and now they're being deprived of that. Let's not even talk about the educational disadvantages that children are going to have. That's what I want to see. I want to see some relief get out there. I'm glad that the current administration is pushing for vaccination, if that's in fact going to help the population.
Right.
But just for starters, I'm thinking about children, our vulnerable population. I worry about elders who are in, hospice care or memory care facilities, senior communities who are isolated from their people. If the virus doesn't get them, isolation might. I worry about what people are going through emotionally, mentally, and not just physically. And then I'm worrying about our hospitals being overrun by COVID patients, and then people with pre-existing conditions outside of COVID not being able to get the care that they need. Like, we got some compound issues going on. But you asked, so I'm answering.
And thank you.
Oh,
And
thank you.
the last thing I want to kind of touch on before we go, S.T.E.A.M Engine Academy is an online school, and we support children all over the country and the world, even abroad. And so part of what I'd like to know is, how are things being handled academically in the virtual realm for Georgia students?
So, around the country, I guess it's the schools are run district by district, county by county. And I know that the county that we're in, some of the children are on a hybrid format, so partially virtually, partially face to face, and some kids are strictly virtual.
Okay.
We are fortunate in that our children are able to do face to face, but there have been some challenges. The older grades, the high school, those kids have more freedom, more autonomy. So they're out and about. So they're coming down with COVID cases a lot faster than the children are on the elementary school level. So, we've missed some days out because of that. But elementary school has done pretty well, and like my youngest son's class size has been really small, which is good for him personally and some of the other children, because they get more one-on-one and they can still have that face-to-face instruction and then interact with their peers, which is, we're learning how important that really is.
Right. And with that too, the challenges of transitioning back into a regular classroom, a typical day. And especially for the younger ones, how are you seeing them affected getting back into the classroom after being home for so long?
Well, I think they're playing catch up. I think kids are just playing catch up. I can't speak for the overall population because, I'm hands-on with my two. But I can say this, that we all need to extend each other a little bit of grace.
Yeah. I hope for the best for all of us for 2021.
For sure.
I'm really hoping to hear the same things you are, that are going to get better and make improvements, and that we all can get healthy. And I appreciate you being here and sharing your side of the country with us and letting me know what are some of the things you're seeing. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Let me just say this. One thing about the pandemic is that this, I feel, has been the great equalizer. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a large part of why so many people are mask wearing resistant, social distant resistant, because folks are not accustomed to being inconvenienced and uncomfortable and being put on a level with everyone else, however you want to put that. But I think that it's been the great equalizer, and it's positive in that way. I like looking out and seeing so many people being supportive of getting vaccinations, being supportive of socially distancing, being supportive of, regular hand washing, and, respecting people who are reluctant to get the vaccination, and respecting those who are pioneering enough to go ahead and do that. So I do see some positive on the ground. And I still believe that there are way more good people than bad.
That alone gives me hope.
Stay hopeful, my sister. Keep hope alive.
Keep hope alive. Thank you, Vivia. And I hope to hear some good news from you soon. Thank you.
Likewise. Love you.
Love you too, sis.
Closing up today's episode, we're going to read What Will I Be? Written and illustrated by Jayla Joseph. There's no limit to what we can achieve. What will I be? What will I be when I grow up? I love to imagine all the things that I can become. There are so many opportunities. There are so many paths. I can be whatever I want to be. How amazing is that? Being an oceanographer would be pretty awesome. I would be able to spend time with the cool marine life and help fight pollution and climate change. Working as a therapist would be very rewarding. I could support people with their mental health and help guide them to improve their lives. How about being a pilot? I would meet different people all over the world. I would go exploring and learn about other cultures. I could even start my own online channel. I would use my influence and voice to share things I believe in. I can be a chef. I would open a restaurant that serves the most delicious food. People would come from far and wide to taste exquisite dishes. I could be a tennis player. The crowd would be cheering me on. I could be the next world champion with lots of hard work and determination. I would love to be an astronaut. I would walk on the moon and get to check out other planets. Or maybe I would prefer to be a Formula One driver. Whizzing around the tracks would be so thrilling. I would have a collection of gold trophies. I can be a writer. I could write a novel about a magical unicorn or a whole television series. Designing computer games would be so much fun. I would use my creativity to create games that children would love. I can become a scientist. I could discover ways to prevent illness and disease by researching DNA. I could help make new medicines and develop vaccines. Being a musician would be fantastic. I would play my violin to a sold-out Royal Albert Hall. I would be rewarding to be a lawyer. I would seek to get justice. Everyone deserves the right to a fair trial. I would do all in my power to help people that have been abused by the system. I can learn how to speak professionally and become an orator. I would deliver speeches to get my point across, using my voice and education to speak out about important issues. How about an artist? I could use my art to express my feelings. I could even have a gallery or illustrate children's books. I ask my friends what they want to be. They say, a young entrepreneur, an engineer, a vet, a firefighter, a teacher or professor, a doctor, an archaeologist, a fashion designer. We all have different skills and passions. With hard work and determination, we can reach our goals. There are no limits on the greatness we can achieve. The end.
One more again. Mas não. Mas não. Mas não. Vivia. Espesso. Vivia. Espesso. Espesso. Mas não vou sem te chamar, Vivia.